Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Carl Schmitt's Legality and Legitimacy. Today we're doing the conclusion. The last two things. This is today's conclusion, and the next session will be the afterword of 1958 afterword. In the later edition of this book, published again in '58, with some thoughts about what he wrote. Again, this is 33, 32, 33, so therefore this is when the conclusion is written. So let's turn to it, okay? Conclusion. Three extraordinary lawgivers, the rationale material, rationale supremus, and rationale necessitas, appear in the Weimar Constitution and endangered the parliamentary legislative state's logically consistent system of legality, to which, despite everything, the Constitution intended to adhere. So, therefore, saying that these three lawgivers that he's addressed in the previous two chapters, that he did these three extraordinary lawgivers that created a situation. In other words, the legislator is the creator of the law, and that creates the legal, and then from that it creates a legal system. Therefore, he's saying that in other words, the logical consistency. It endangered the parliament legislative logical consistent system of legality, because this was what the Constitution, despite everything, the Constitution intended to adhere to this legislative parliamentary model. Okay, right? At this point, further complications that stem from the resulting effects of the federal element of the Constitution should remain entirely out of account. So therefore, let's ignore, for this point right now, these three things, let's ignore the question of the problems of the federal system. So therefore, the problem is that a federal system versus a unitary system, that's already going to be a big difficulty. So let's ignore this problem and understand that this is going to be, in other words, a legislative state in a federal system is going to be more complicated than a federal state in a legislative in a unitary state. Okay, so therefore that's going to be a divided federal state. It's going to have jurisdictions and aspects of this that are going to frustrate the legislative state, the law in that sense. It's not going to be as uniform and system. In other words, just ignore that. Let's not address this. So let's not add in the further complications. Just these three things alone. One can surmise that such a position, the ordinary parliamentary legislature, may not have withstood the attack of the three extraordinary rivals. So one can surmise they were not three extraordinary rivals. Indeed, this supposition would be theoretically incorrect. In other words, indeed, one can surmise in such a position this parliament may not have survived. This is theoretically incorrect. So as long as it remains in mention consideration of constitutional structure, in other words, it's not as long as we're stuck in the terms of constitutional structure. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. He's saying, okay, right? It's saying, let's repeat this. And indeed, this would be theoretically incorrect. Given those three rivals, it would fall apart theoretically. No, it's not, if we're just stuck on terms of enmeshed in consideration of constitutional structure, no, it's not necessarily theoretically, that'd be theoretically incorrect. For where it is a matter of fundamental political decision on the Constitution, which involves the complete state form, the system of the Constitution, the system of the Constitution we decidedly adopt as a principle of Constitution is always superior, so long as another system just as fundamental and logically consistent is not being established. So therefore he's saying that as long as there's not going to be another system, in other words, the fundamental the fundamental political decision of the Constitution. The fundamental political decision on the Constitution, which involves the complete state form. The system of the Constitution decidedly adopts as a principle of construction is always the principle the principle of this is always superior. Not as long as that is not a, in other words, not as long as another system just as fundamental or logically consistent as not being established. So in other words, the logic of the principle here is the legislative state, right? The legislative state, the parliamentary legislative parliamentary state. That's the general principle, he's saying. So even the parliament assumes this. As long as there's not another principle being established, then everything is fine, right? So just even though there's three extraordinary, if they were still, if these things were just implemented consistently with the legislative principle, then this would be fine. In other words, would not really be a problem, he's saying. The parliaments of the French Republic, for example, succeeded in making harmless and safe approaches to the plebiscitary legitimacy contained in the possibility of the dissolution of parliament under the constitutional law of 1875. The complete secularization of the French state corresponded to a logical, consistent, liberal value neutrality in confessional and religious matters. For the foreseeable future, a control parliament through the exercise of substantive forms of judicial review or other methods of jurisdictional state will not come into consideration in practical terms for the French Republic. Certainly, these French constitutional laws of 1875 limit themselves to organizational provisions and do not recognize the extraordinary lawmakers of the Weimar Constitution. That's not, so therefore, the French, goes to the French example, saying, well, the French system works. The French system, as far as the laws of the 1875, makes sense. The so-called Third Republic, right? This is the Third Republic, and therefore it works. It may not be completely great stable, but it works in that sense. It's able not to. It doesn't have the same structural problems as the Weimar Constitution, right? It does not recognize the extraordinary lawmaker of the Weimar. Despite this, the parliamentary system of legality could have remained victorious under this constitution, even the Weimar Constitution. For the deviations from the parliamentary legislative states of fundamental precepts and structural principles that lie in the introduction of the previous mentioned three extraordinary lawmakers are in themselves unclear, and the Constitution itself not thought through to the end. In other words, it isn't. In other words, the deviations of the previous the parliamentary states fundamental principles and structures that lie in the introduction of those three extraordinary things are themselves unclear in the Constitution itself. So in terms of the Constitution itself, this is not a problem, he said. Not thought through to the end. In other words, these things were not necessarily thought through to the end, right? They contained institutional experiments and approaches that are meant rather as a corrective to certain deficiencies of the parliamentary system, which, as such, saved the system, but should not have taken it should not have taken as establishing a new type of state, whether or not it is now a jurisdictional, governmental, administrative state. In other words, it is not going to create a new state. These corrections aren't going to create a state, whether it be a jurisdictional, governmental, administrative. It's not going to create a new state. These things are not. These innovations are done to preserve the parliamentary state, not to introduce a new state. He's arguing, right? It's correction. And the previously mentioned deviations immediately lose a great deal of their practical significance when the Parliament reasserts its power with a decisive unitary will. So once there's a united will behind the legislature and the ordinary Parliament, and there is a decisive will in this, it can overturn these. In other words, it controls the full effects of this, right? Even a simple majority has the means, through its statutes and governmental dependency on its confidence, to become legal masters in competition with the jurisdictional state without much difficulty. In other words, a simple parliamentary majority, if it is decisive and is conservative and it has a real majority that is supported by the population, right? it is going to be able to overturn the jurisdictional aspects of judges, right? The jurisdictional things, right? A simple majority has the means through its statute and the government dependent on its confidence to become legal masters of legal master of competition in the jurisdictional state without great difficulties. The substantive constitutional guarantees allow them to be divided into parts that, due to their unpolitical form, the are uninteresting to the present majority, and into others that, because of their political significance, could be subject to the power of the current majority. So again, this is the logic. So therefore, these things are unimportant. These things are important. Therefore, if it's important, we will insert our will on it. Right? The Parliament also has multiple possibilities to make the secondary ordinary legislature and its competitor, the plebiscitary legislative process, practically meaningless. They could just basically do it. That has actually happened to great success in recent years because of the previous discussed interpretation of Article 75, sanctioned by the Electoral Review Commission, and already considered conclusive, right, by G. Anschluss in 1912. One determined the participation of the majority of voters even during a referendum in response to initiative. In other words, one demanded the participation of the majority of the voters by doing this. Right, this basically limited the impact of this, and they didn't give a smaller majority more power than the simple majority. Right. In this way, one effectively eliminated the secret ballot in a democratic calculation of voting results, and rendered a secret ballot in democratic and rendering the holding of such a referendum almost impossible. It is of the greatest interest that precisely in opposition to plebiscitary lawgiver, in other words, it is the greatest interest that precisely in opposition to this plebiscitary lawgiver, and also on account of the government, one recalls the substantive concept of law and the principle of separation of powers, through which one excludes measures, government acts, among other things, from this legislative process. In other words, you can't. This thing can only be kind of a very specific thing. In other words, it shouldn't. You should exclude measures, government acts, and other things from this process of this plebiscite. Finally, the third extraordinary lawgiver, the dictator in Article 48, can be legally active only so long as the parliamentary legislature tolerates it. That is, the parliament makes no use of its right to demand that the measures be rescinded, and also does not cast a no confidence vote in the right government that must countersign it. Several applications of Article 48-2, especially the practice of emergency decrees in recent years, appears as approximately used summary legislative procedures, which is grounded on the tacit grant of authority from Parliament. Right. In all three cases, of course, conflicts are conceivable. In other words, all these three cases that Parliament conflicts could have conceivable. And yet, the constitutional division of powers is such that, with a firm and recognizable will, the majority of the Reichstag, as the legislative legal victor, can legally hold the field. In other words, the legal victor can easily hold the field. So, therefore, this is again Schmitt saying, "Listen, if the Parliament was with a clear majority, can act, it can act decisively, and it does, and can do, even with this mess of a constitution." Nevertheless, the parliamentary legislative states system of legality is not restored in this way. However, the problem is that the legal system is not restored. Right? He's saying that yes, the parliamentary process of the state and the structures of the state works, but the problem here is the legal system and how the legal system will understand and define these things. And if the parliamentarians then follow that, then it's screwed up, right? This is the problem, right? Um, all three cases, in other words, in all three cases, of course, conflicts are conceivable, and yet the constitutional division of power is such that a firm and recognize the will, the majority rights legal needs to hold the field. Nevertheless, the parliamentary legislative state system of legality is not restored in this way. The current will of the present parliamentary majority has long since only been based of on a compromise of thoroughly heterogeneous power organizations, and the parliament has become the showplace of a pluralist system. In other words, instead of a simple majority parliament, it becomes a pluralist model, and therefore it's not held together by any real sense of the term. It's not a majority party controlling it, it's a fraction, it's coalitions. It's a pluralist model of coalition structure. And because of the coalitions, it's not a firm government, it's kind of a back deal agreement of you do this and then we agree to this, right? So therefore, it's not a heterogeneous majority party, it's a heterogeneous power organization. And parliament becomes a showcase of pluralism. The pluralist splintering becomes quite evident even during the attempt to create a type of substitute for parliament in the form of advisory bodies, committees, and like. As such, for example, the president's so-called Economic Advisory Board of 1931, right? So, in other words, in order to do this, we created an advisory board to bypass parliament, right? In other words, the pluralism is quite evident even during in order to create substitutes for parliament in forms of advisory bodies, right? The logically executed pluralism needs a type of justification other than the legality of parliament. In other words, the parliamentary legislature. So, in other words, the pluralist model needs. In other words, pluralism has the legislative, parliamentary legislative state, and pluralism are not necessarily connected. This is the point he made in his earlier book on parliamentary, Eileen Kelly's translation, "The Crisis of Parliamentary Democracy." What he is saying here is, sorry, guys, no, this is not. In other words, the logically excluded pluralism type needs a type of identification other than the legality of this. The bearer of the pluralist system, in other words, firmly anchored power organizations that encompass their members totally in respect to their worldview and their economic and other perspectives, transforms all jurisdictions, those of the state generally, the federal system, the localities, the system of social welfare law, and others, into points in their political constellation. In other words, there's not a unitary state, there's not a unitary will. It becomes like, in one sense, it becomes every level of this becomes a battleground of pluralism, and therefore it becomes a divided will. And every part is like that. This battle is happening at every stage of the system and this of the state, right? Of like he says, those of the state generally, the federal system, the localities, the system of welfare, and other points, right? Into points of power constellations. These organizations form the defining state will, and for what matters here above all, issues of life and death for them. So, in other words, this becomes what the organizations, these forms, they define the state will. All these organizations form the defining state will. For that matters here above all are life and death issues for them. And they cannot allow themselves, because these are life and death, they cannot allow themselves to be voted down or to be subsumed into a majority through alliance and compromises with other partners of the plural system. So therefore, if it's life, in other words, the plural system only works when there's no life and death issues. If there's everyone, it's in other words, again, this is Schmitt saying, if something's a life and death issue, it's a zero-sum game. It's going to be I win, you lose, and that, I'm sorry, That pluralism can't work in that. Pluralism can only work in a win-win model where that all the parties can, not just one party will win. In other words, if every one of these things is existentially fighting a situation where it's life and death for me, life and death, then there's no compromise. It's my life or your life. Trust me, the logic is I prefer my life. I'm not going to sacrifice. If it's just it's not like an economic choice. This is no longer this is an economic choice. Is the cost benefit, the cost here. Okay, life is life and death is I live or I die. The cost is I die. The benefit is I live. Okay, if I live, in other words, the cost is not dying, right? Is I don't pay a cost. If I lose, I will die. So the cost is very high, right? Existential in that sense. There's an existential moment in that sense between living and dying, right? Um, this is not economics. On a life and death position, there cannot be economic. There can be, it's a zero. In other words, life and death is a zero sum game. And other things that you can have situations where the cost and benefits, as long as it's not life and death, there's degrees. I have different wants. Maybe, in other words, that's the famous argument about markets. This is This is what where and there was various. The pluralist system assumes a non-zero sum game when multiple parties that can form enough of a coalition to form a majority can get control. Right. That's the whole nature of a plural system, that there can be win-win capacities for many groups, and that even though the groups may be small, they can form enough of they share enough interests in common that they can compromise. They can make a compromise where they can, okay, I give up something, but I get something I want, you get something. We all get what we kind of want. We give up things that we don't want that much. Okay, you know, that's the whole idea of this, right? And in other words, this is that they cannot allow themselves to be voted down or to be subsumed by a majority through alliances and compromises with other partners in a plural system. Right? That's the whole point, right? For the sake of themselves and their political existence, they cannot renounce influencing definitely the concept. In other words, they cannot renounce influencing definitely the concepts of the Constitution in its interpretation, so long as they exist politically as such. In other words, if there's things they cannot renounce their ability to define these things for the sake of themselves and their existence. They cannot renounce influencing the definitively the concepts of the Constitution. In other words, I can change those concepts. I can what he's saying, influence the defin, def, definitively the concepts of the Constitution and their interpretations, as long as these things exist, right? If they become caught up in the logic of a system of legality, there is a threat to their type of existence. There is a threat to their type of existence. They must either give up their political existence or make good on the right to resistance in some form. In other words, if they stick to the legality of the system, logic of the legality system, that is a threat to their existence, their principle, their view. They must either give up their political existence or attack it, and make good on their right to resist it in some form, right? As noted, however, the elimination of every right to resistance is the actual function of the legality concept. And once again, this is essential to the parliamentary legislative state in a specific way. So in other words, the nature of the legislative state, you don't have no longer a right to resist. Because the idea that as long as there's the process, but you can elect new people, then your will is being represented. And that therefore you're just lost the will, and therefore you have to obey the will. We all agreed to this. We have to obey the will. Otherwise, it'd be war and chaos, and we can't allow this. So therefore, you have no right to resist anymore. We don't have rights to resist. Only the state has the right to make a decision and that the will represents the people's will, and that this is how the logic goes, right? So, and once again, the essential to the parliamentary legislature is the specific, in a specific way, in a sense. The power of pluralistic the party state, uh, um, have in fact little interest in logical consistency. In other words, the powers of pluralistic party state, the pluralistic party, this is a new termination, the pluralistic party state, each the different parties, they don't have any, they don't have a little interest in logical consistency. They gladly remain in the twilight of an intermediary state, which permits them to emerge first, emerge first as state, and then as social power, and then mere party, all the while enjoying the advantage of influence on state will without the responsibility and risk of the political. In a way, in this way, playing, okay, the do so next. Okay, how do I do this? This is French. Together, right? Playing together. This way of playing together, which with this, in other words, they don't. In other words, they have to playing, everyone together, two together. Um, um, in other words, they keep their idea. This they can play. They keep their power with this, and they don't have to play as one thing, as one entity in that sense, right? In this playing together, right? In a way, playing together with responsibility and risk the political in this way, playing together in that sense. With this will to inconsistency, the parliamentary state system of legality is in no way safe. In other words, you don't this idea that everyone can be inconsistent and they can do their will and this like this. The parliamentary legislature will not be safe. Certainly, such the intermediate condition invalidates the parliamentary legislative state and its concept of illegality. In other words, certainly, it's such an intermediate condition that everyone is doing their things and not going to, I'm going to rebel. I'm not going to play ball. I'm not going to obey. I'm going to keep on rebelling. I'm going to block the system. I'm going to, I'm going to, because I'm first, he says that emerge first as state, then solely social power, and then merge mere party, right? All while enjoying the advantage influence on the state institutions, right? Without responsibility and risk, or the risk of the friend enemy situation of conflict. In other words, I'm avoiding that this I am gauging war. I obey or wage war. I am waging war without waging war. Okay. And therefore, by doing this way, he says this invalidates the parliamentary legislature and its concept of legality. The same is true of a further unavoidable consequence of the plural system: the denial of the principle of equal chance. In other words, that we have to deny the principle of equal chance. This is true of an unavoidable consequence of this plural system: the denial of the principle of equal chance. All parties that are not partners of the pluralist system will be denied an equal chance. If you're not pluralist, you don't buy the pluralist model, you're going to be denied this, right? The result is the same, whether one considers the right, the left, or the center the guilty party, and whether one has a single party that one can denounce for initiating the elimination of the prerequisites of this idea of equal chance, initiating the elimination of the prerequisites of legality. It is an open question whether a return to a pure condition of an unadulterated, that is, homogeneous, parliamentary majorities would restore the system of legality, or whether it would not be more reasonable to expect the worst misuse of the previous discussed power premium and greater danger for the system of legality precisely from homogeneous, simple, or indeed constitutionally amending majorities. In other words, you're going to get. How can we? In other words, maybe that once you've done this way, we've done this to this degree. Once these life and death, once there's no longer, in other words, there's the real danger of what happens these states. Someone gets a supermajority and you can undo these things, right? This becomes really a threat. And this can undo the pluralist system. And therefore, you have to ban those who are not pluralist in that sense, right? Okay. Okay, let's go right here. Ready? For in this way, the essential presupposition of legality concept in the pluralist party state, party state, collapses. In other words, this whole thing, the whole model collapses. In other words, in this way, the essential presupposition of legality of this model, everyone equal chances, everything. No, it comes to the new type of constitutional form corresponding to the developed pluralist system has has as of yet not become evident. Neither the actual power of the pluralist organizations nor the reigning constitutional theory of the time have brought about specific formations. So this has not the practical pluralist model hasn't really come into being yet. He's saying has not become evident. Neither the actual power of the pluralist organization nor the reigning constitutional theory of the time brought about specific formations yet. Okay, formations of this. Neither the organizations, the plural organizations, nor the reigning theory of state, theory, constitutional theory of the time, right, has brought about the specific formations of this new thing. Till now, moreover, everything runs in the grooves and operates with the formulas of the traditional system of justification. The parties seek the legality of the momentary possession of power. Most importantly, to exploit the political premiums and the surpluses of power it offers. But they run up against the system of the plebiscitary democratic legitimacy, set against the parliamentary legislative system of legality in the same degree to which they undermine the system of legality of the parliamentary legislative state. So this new pluralist model runs up immediately against the problem of the plebiscitary democratic legitimacy of that thing, right? In the same way the party state model runs up against the pluralist party state, runs up against the legislative state. Schmitt is saying that they also run up against this plebiscitary democratic legitimacy threatens them. And look at the same degree that they undermine the system of the empire. Not only does the president, who serve as the counterbalance to the parliament, finds support in the legitimacy of popular presidential plebiscitary elections. Therefore, the president who serves as a counterbalance to parliament finds legitimacy in the popular elections. Parliament itself is no longer. The parliament itself has no longer. The parliament itself also no longer has the dignity of an assembly characterized by the specific qualities and the issues and that issue statutes in the specific sense of the word. In other words, that it's lost. The parliament no longer has the dignity of an assembly characterized by a specific qualities that issue statutes. Right. It no longer has the distinctive independent meaning it should have as the source of legality in legislative state based on legality. Right. For the election has become a plebiscitary procedure. Okay. President of this that the president has equal status and equal balance of it, right? For a long time now, it has not been a selection in the sense of the presentation or an elevation of an elite and the founding of an independent representation. Exhibiting the same plebiscitarian effect. The delusion of parliament has become a normal procedure with the sense of an appeal to the people, therefore once again having plebiscitary meaning and functions. The present parliament, with its transitory majority, is still then only a plebiscitary shifting of gears. Solely for social technical reasons, parliaments attain a derisive status in the system of plebiscitary procedures. Derivative attains a derivative status in this parliamentary system. Therefore, once you accept plebiscitary, plebiscitary procedures, plebiscitary system, that therefore in this model, right, exhibiting the same plebiscitary effect, the dilution of parliament has become a normal procedure with the sense of appeal to people, and therefore the present parliament is merely a transitory majority, transient majority. It's only shifting gears, he says, solely for social technical reasons. Parliament is a derivative stature of this of a plebiscitary system. In view of the president's practice of emergency decrees, the German state appears at present concretely constitutional. Appears in its present concrete constitutional reality as a combination of administrative and jurisdictional states, which finds its type of final justification in the foundations of the context of the plebiscitary democratic legitimacy. So therefore, this is what happens. The final German state is this not because of the way the presidential is running things, the German state appears as merely the concrete reality as a combination of an administrative and jurisdictional state that finds its final justification in the plebiscitary democratic legitimacy. Here, the meaning of the plebiscitary expression of will is, however, not norm establishment, but decision through one will, as the word referendum or popular decision aptly expresses. So therefore, it's a decision is made, a decision, a will, referendum. It also lies in the nature of things that plebiscites can only be held momentarily and intermittently. Um, the oft-cited daily plebiscite, the uh, um, okay, this is the plebiscite of all, everyone, of all. This is right now, as I think, the daily plebiscite of all, plebiscite of everyone, right, is in reality hardly possible to organize. The people can only respond yes or no, right? They cannot advise, debate, discuss. They cannot govern or administer. They cannot set norms, but can only sanction norms by consenting to a draft set of norms laid before them. In other words, I can set a norm before you, yes, no, only yes, no. They can't debate. They can't do all these things. They can't advise, debate, discuss. The general populace can only. They're not. That's why we create representative system, because that to allow the small people who can do this, right? The whole society at large is just too large of a thing. You won't be able to have discussion. It won't be organized. It won't be able to do this. They cannot set norms, but they can only sanction norms by consenting to a draft set of norms laid before them. They uh, 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 above all, they cannot pose a question, but can only answer with yes or no to a question placed before them. Right? So, not again, this repeats the other point that they can't ask a question. The referendum can only say, okay, of this question put before you, yes or no, right? If the people are presented a series of party lists instead of answerable questions, lists that, once again, our products are produced in a deeply obscure shadow of party committee rooms, and if the government avoids posing a decisive question through parliamentary discussions, then the election process itself becomes pointless. Because you're just giving party lists. Who creates the party lists? The citizens don't create the party lists. The parties do. The party lists are there, and therefore they put the list in there. The citizens have no impact, so they get and therefore they focus not on the real character of the people being elected. They focus on the symbol or what the party stands for. They believe, they like it, don't like it. It's this kind of thing, right? And therefore it becomes a pointless. The election process is simply just an opinion. Yes, no, this, that. Right? Um, let's repeat that line. If the government avoids possessing a decisive okay, here it is. If the people are presented with party lists instead of answerable questions, the lists that once again are products of obscure shadow party committee rooms. If the parliamentary avoids opposing a decisive question through parliamentary uh, 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 dissolutions, then the election process itself becomes pointless. In terms of its significance, the process is no longer election, but rather a plebiscite. Okay, it becomes in other words, election is no longer an election. The process of this is no longer election of an official, of a person choosing a person, but a plebiscite in a radical sense, a yes or no. Okay. However, because of the lack of answerable questions, or at best, or in the best case, only through a fortunate accident does not even become an actual plebiscite expressing a yes or no. In other words, because of the badly questioned how they do electing parties, we don't get a yes or a no. We get a complicated thing, so we don't get this by accident, right? And nevertheless, plebiscitary legitimacy is a single type of state justification that may be generally acknowledged as valid today. In other words, that 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 may that in other words, nevertheless, the plebiscite legitimacy is a single type of state justification that may be generally acknowledged as valid today. It is also probable that this can explain a large part of the tendency towards the authoritarian state that are without doubt present today. So therefore, this is idea the plebiscitary system creates this legitimacy, but this also leads to the authoritarian state, right? These tendencies may not simply be brushed aside as reactionary or restaurant rest, rest, restorational restorational yearnings. In other words, you just can't say this because that this publisher may be authoritarian. This thing cannot be dismissed as merely reactionary restoration. Of much greater significance is the realization that the cause of the contemporary total state, more precisely the total politicization of human existence, is to be sought in democracy, and that, as Heinz O. Ziegler explained, the total state needs a stable authority in order to move ahead with the necessary depoliticization and to reestablish free spheres and living spaces from within itself, period. So therefore, it needs this total state in order to create the depoliticization, right? One sees seen in terms of constitutional theory, however, the strongest impulse behind the previously noted tendency towards authoritas. Authoritas, which authority towards authority, right? Exactly. Lies in the situation itself and stems directly from the fact that plebiscitary legitimacy is at present the single last remaining accepted system of justification. So only just plebiscite is the only thing that justifies and gives legitimacy and authority. A system of accepting legitimacy, justification. System of justification. That's what's legitimacy, right? Due to their dependence on the posing of a question, all plebiscite methods presuppose a government that not only attends to business, but also has the authority to properly undertake the plebiscitory questioning at the right moment. Hence, look at what happened with Brexit. They gave a thing, but then the government was not the government who answered the plebiscite wasn't able to affect it. In fact, went against it. They thought, they thought it wasn't going to happen, right? And that forces within that same parliament sought to ignore or overturn the referendum. But in the current view, that it is the only that since the democratic system, only democracy, democratic voice has this to therefore deny the referendum was to deny the very legitimacy of the whole system. So this is what Schmitt is pointing to. This is the danger of the plebiscitory system in that sense. Because it explains the government should have been able to enforce it, right? If it's going to allow for the plebiscite, then it should, but it didn't really want to, right? And that undoes the system in a sense. It deconstructs the system. The question can only be posed from above. In other words, plebiscites can only be posed from above. They can't be posed from below. These arguments, right? So therefore, this is why it becomes a total state model, an authoritarian model. The authoritarian, not authoritarian, but some kind of total state model, right? In other words, undertake the plebiscitary questioning at the right moment. Right? The question can only be posed from above. The answer comes from below. Here again, the formula of the great constitutional designer, Sinlees, holds true. And this is that famous. He's that. This is that. Um, uh, um, Holds true. Authority from above, confidence from below. Plebiscitary. Sorry, I got derailed for a second. Plebiscitary legitimacy requires a government or some other authoritarian organ in which one can have confidence that it will pose the correct question in the proper way and not misuse the great power that lies in the possessing the questions. Therefore, this is the problem. It needs the question being posed must be doing this. It's hard to do it from below, and I say, right? That is very significant in a rare type of authority. Saying this is very significant and a very rare type of authority. It can derive from different sources, from the effects, from the effect and impression of a great political success, perhaps from authoritarian residue of the pre-democratic time, or from the admiration of a quasi-democratic elite, or which the present organized parties are at most only a surrogate or a caricature of. Right? In other words, there's a memorous qualification of this, which the present organized parties are only a surrogate or a caricature of. Even a government that seeks support with the force of the army or the civil service, instead of relying on parliamentary legality or on the plebiscitary legitimacy of elected president, need plebiscitary legitimacy as a sanction because there is simply no other type of available today. So even a military coup would require to use the plebiscite as a mechanism of legitimization. Okay, because no other mechanism of legitimization is possible today. But the government must also resolve to initiate the posing of the plebiscitary question, and that with the full risk of failure. In other words, you have to ask the question, you can risk failing it, right? It is only seemingly more certain to exploit the type of superiority that the government gains through the failure of all other besides itself, so long as the government avoids posing a clear question. In other words, if you pose a clear question, you run the risk of doing this. So that as long as that is that is possible for a time, the mantle of plebiscitary legitimacy is broad and richly textured, and can clothe and conceal much. But for those seeking support, the appeal of the people will always lead to some loss of independence. And even the famous example of Napoleonic plebiscites show how precarious and reversible such legitimization devices are. It would generally be a dangerous error to consider the instrument of the plebiscite legitimacy not as a not as not as harmful as the other methods, and hope that a weak hand or diminished will can find here an especially easily application and a welcome supplement. In other words, this is it's a very dangerous thing. It is. In other words, he's saying it would generally be a dangerous error to consider the instrument of the plebiscite as not as harmful as other methods, and hope that a weak hand or a diminished will can find here an especially easy application and welcome supplement to the Constitution. Okay, no. It's like you just slit your own throat. You don't even realize it, right? This totally, in this totality, certainly the the momentary immediate state is characterized by the striving for extensions and supplements. In unclear transitional periods, every government will avoid posing a plebiscitary question that can be answered conclusively with a yes or a no, despite the plebiscitary method of parliamentary dissolution. Right? Despite this method, the presidential dissolution decree of June 4, 1932, offers as its justification that the Reichstag no longer corresponds to the political will of the German people. According to the results of the elections of the German Länder parliaments in the recent month, right? Therefore, there was Landers, the Landers said, therefore, this government no longer does it, I'm going to suspend it. The plebiscitary justification is bound up there with the avoidance of a plebiscite question. And the election following such a dissolution can offer no answer conclusive enough to contain a secure political decision. So therefore, this is okay. The way it was done. Oh yeah, I'm dissolving this because these elections indicate this. Oh wait a minute. Okay, this is not no real question is presented here, right? No, either or. Yes, no, right? The plebiscitary justification is bound up here with the avoidance of a plebiscitary question. And the election following from such a discussion can offer no answer conclusive enough to secure this political decision. The entire process is neither a general election nor a true plebiscite. And depending on its results, it only serves the government or unites the parties of a supplement as a supplement to legitimacy that is absent. In other words, it is basically just doing what? It's going to secure someone. Not really a true plebiscite or a true election. It only kind of serves the government or unites parties as a supplement to legitimacy that is really absent. But even the civil service supporting the administrative state understandably searches for such extensions. The civil service is bound up with a tradition of bound up with traditional forms of legitimacy, whether it is dynamic or democratic plebiscitary, both of which are not suited to the new tasks of the state in transition towards totality. In other words, the state is becoming an economic state, welfare state, and much else. In other words, the state is becoming something else, an economic state, a welfare state, some other state. and that therefore the current that neither of these models are going to be the bureaucracy is going to that whether a dynastic this or plebiscitary thing is not going to be both of which are not suited to the task of a transition to a totality, right? In this way, the civil service state is also a delegated authority, as according to the Roman public law, an office that is that has um, okay. This is, I'm sorry, I'm just stopping here. I should stop. Action, yes. The action is the. In other words, the office had the of the fathers, the just, was it right law of the fathers, the you know father's action law, that the office that had the justice of the father's action itself received the autoritas, yeah, the authority of the state. So in other words, that this the Roman public law, according to this, the thing that had the law of or the right of the father's action, it itself received the authority of the state. The king or that, and finds opportunities for this part. And finds opportunities for this party in the president, partly through the doctrine of the highest court, especially the state Gerichtshof and the Reich Gerichtshof, the state courts and the Supreme Court, right? The highest courts. Both these courts have pointed out, the president. Therefore, they want to regain the kind of thing of that traditional king had, and that this is the closest of that, right? The father who acts decisively, right? But it is self-evident that the courts can only fulfill this function so long as the authority lasts, and it is not yet used up in deciding questions of political power through the judicial process. In other words, the court is still, in other words, but it is self-evident the courts can only do this legitimization of to giving this saying this is all right as long as their authority lasts, and it is not yet used up questioning deciding questions of political power through the judicial process. Because once they start doing that, then the legislative parties will go after them, right? In the end, under the characteristic conditions of the party state, the party state, such a party state, conditions of a party state, the organizational barriers of the pluralist system can generally only serve on supplements, since they produce no inner authority of their own. So therefore, this is no authority. Although the Constitution demands a government with the confidence of Parliament, those pillars of the plural system ultimately give the government neither a confidence nor a no confidence vote. Rather, they find a series of in between formulations, such as approving or tolerating, as the expression of their intermediate condition between state and party. While they grant no enabling act, they also do not demand the suspension of the decrees issued under Article 48. So they're not going to give an enabling act, and they're not going to do Article 48. Even in this regard, they prefer the above noted intermediate condition. They prefer the condition of the intermediate condition because a pluralist party state becomes total out of weakness, not out of strength and power. So it's a total state, not because of it prefers it total state because it wants to keep the situation as an in between intermediate condition. And it does so out of weakness, not authority. The state intervenes in every area of life because it must fulfill the claim of all interested parties. It must, it must, it must especially involved in the area of the economy, which until now was free of state influence, even if, even for, even if it foregoes any leadership in the political influence on the economy. So it must intervene, even though it gives up any real influence. A state that, in the economic technical age, willingly refuses to appropriately acknowledge and guide economic and technological development must declare itself neutral in regard to the political questions and decisions, thereby giving up its claim to rule. So he's quoting somebody, I think. Nevertheless, even if it were still quite weak, no state would ever renounce its claim to rule under conditions of the denial and elimination of every right to resistance, so long as it is at all prepared to act as a state. In other words, they're not going to give this up. Nevertheless, even if it was still quite weak, no state would renounce its claim to rule under conditions of denial and elimination of every right of resistance. So long as it's prepared to act as a state, you act as a state, you can do it. On the contrary, it could even confirm what Benjamin Constant said, that the weak and the mediocre use of power, that the weak and the mediocre use the power they inherit more desperately and more dangerously than a genuine power, even when this power lets its passion get the better of it. So therefore, if there was a weak power, weak community will act much more, that has used power more desperately and more dangerously than a real power, even if this power lets its passion get a better of it. In that sense, in other words, that the power gets a benefit. That even that's going to be better than that. Okay. Consequently, a weak state also searches indiscriminately for legitimizations, and sanctions, making use of them as they find them. So a weak state will constantly search for indiscriminately for legalizations, legitimization, and sanctions, making use of them as using them as they find them. Right? He's saying here, in a state form that is qualitatively total, according to the scope and subjective area of its interventions, and yet simultaneously is a highly fragmented pluralistic party state. There are clumps of power subject to political influence. In fact, power centers that are relatively lasting as well as okay, ephemeral, a ph, ephemeral, as well as ephemeral, all of which stands under the same compulsion to exploit the moment of their power and to get a head start on the domestic opponent and to consider every type of justification as a weapon to domestic political struggle. So, legality and legitimacy then become tactical instruments that each can use for momentary advantage, throwing them to the side when such instruments are directed against oneself. So therefore, these legitimacy and these are just tactical instruments in that sense, right? That I can use to attack you with that, but then if they're aimed at me, I can just say, "Oh no, they don't matter," right? And that one constantly seeks to knock out of from the hands of the other. So I'm going to knock. That was aimed at me. I'm going to knock it out of your hands, right? Neither parliamentary legality nor plebiscite legitimacy, nor some other conceivable system of justification can overcome such a degradation to a technical functional tool. In other words, it was legality and this. These are technical functional tools that once you put the pluralist model on it, this destroys it. He's saying that neither this nor that or any other justification can overcome the denigration of these technical tools. Even the Constitution itself breaks up into contradictory components and interpretive possibilities, such that no normative fiction of a unity can prevent warring factions from making use of that part of the Constitution. Oh God, this is powerful. I mean, even the Constitution itself breaks up into contradictory components. That the interpretive possibilities that such that no normative fiction can of a unity can prevent warring factions from making use of that part of the Constitution in the constitutional text that they believe is best suited for knocking the opposing party to the ground in the name of the Constitution. Oh God, is anyone else seeing this about contemporary America right now? Um, Legality, legitimacy, and constitution would then contribute only to the sharpening, not the preservation of civil strife. So, therefore, in other words, my God, this is a great point here. That therefore, this is where the Constitution. I mean, that is a great part. I mean, I copy that for a second because it was just like, oh my God. Okay. Um, Neither the parliamentary legality nor the plebiscitary legitimacy nor some other conceivable system of justification can overcome this situation. It becomes survivable in that sense, right? Um, Even it breaks up into this weapons of this. So therefore, all these things become, as he says, legality, legitimacy, and this is nothing but a weapon, and therefore it doesn't reduce civil strife, but sharpens it. Such is in such a position and with such methods, residue authority exhausts itself as quickly as legality and legitimacy and a reshaping of the Constitution is generally perceived as necessary. In other words, that these things are. In other words, the residue authority exhausts itself as quickly as legitimacy and legality of the system is starting to break down, and collapse, right? And the reshaping of the Constitution is generally perceived as necessary. Even the lowest type of status quo interest then will harmonize in harmonize in the call of reforms. It will be unfortunate to the highest degree if, in such hands, the unavoidable reshaping would also become a tactical instrument of compromise, and of the greatest possible of reform would be squandered with some organizational displacement. Right? In other words, it's not going to be reformed. The compromisers will get it. This would end. To this end, what is required is a clear conscientious a clear consciousness of the fundamental constructive connection that distinguishes a constitution from some product of the partisan legislative machine. We have to distinguish between, in other words, a process of a legislative machine is not a constitution. Constitution is these two things must be separate. A constitution versus what a product of a partisan legislative machine. In other words, it cannot be a constitution cannot be a product of a partisan legislative machine. It must be consensus in some sense. Above all, one must clearly emphasize the first and the most important question that confronts every serious plan for the reshaping of the German constitutional system. It concerns the fundamental alternative: recognition of the substantive characteristic and capacities of the German people, or the retention and extension of the functioning value neutrality, with a fiction of the indiscriminate equal chances for all constant goals and drives. In other words, you have a choice. Either we're going to look at the substantive character and capacities of German people, or keep the value neutral system. That's the real either or here. The Constitution would a Constitution that would not dare to reach a decision on this question, one that forgoes imposing a substantive order, but chooses instead to give warring factions, intellectual circles, and political programs the illusion of gaining satisfaction legally and achieving their party goals and eliminating their enemies, both by legal means such as the Constitution is no longer even such a Constitution is no longer possible, even possible today, as a dilatory formal compromise. And as a practical matter, it would end by destroying its own legality and legitimacy. So the thing will end up this what he says here, right? It will destroy itself in that sense. It will necessarily fail at the critical moment when the Constitution must prove itself. As shown above, it belongs among the defects of the Weimar Constitution that even here it's attempt a combination through which finally the first and second principal part stands opposite one another to two different constitutions with distinct types of logical consistency, spirit, and foundation. And this constitution now stands in its full contradictions. But what lay shadowy and clear in the intention of Friedrich Neumann, mocked by the raucous laughter of an unimaginative pre-war positivism, that he proposed his draft of the fundamental rights, had indeed a closer realization of the essence of a German constitution than does the value neutrality of the functional majority system. So the latter model, the latter thing, which everyone kind of laughed at it, like, oh, was more correct to the German thing than this one. Now, if in knowledge of that now, if in the knowledge that the Weimar Constitution is in two constitutions, one chooses between them, then the decision must fall for the principle of the second constitution in his attempt to establish a substantive order. The core of the second principal part of the Weimar Constitution deserves to be liberated from the self-contradictions of the compromise deficiencies, and to be developed according to the inner logical consistency. Achieve this goal, and the idea of a German constitutional work is saved. Otherwise, it will meet a quick end along with the fictions of fictions of neutral majority functionalism that is pitted against value and truth. Then truth will have its revenge. So again, this ends here. That truth will have its revenge. In other words, his argument. This is very interesting. He's not arguing for anyone who says Schmitt's a Nazi. This is ridiculous. He's saying that we should support the second part, which actually values the certain specific rights and specific things. If we have a choice to save the Weimar Constitution, the first or the second part, dump the first part. The functional structure is this value neutral functionalism. Embrace the second one and create a system that defends that. That's liberalism. I think this is a very strong argument. If we look at here, that Schmitt is dramatically not embracing. He even says that this. He's only warning that the authoritarian logic of what's happening, this total state and these things. He's not championing the total state. I mean, this is why he would not. If he was championing total state, why didn't he give a more consistent argument for the dictatorship? He doesn't. He sees the dictator. It's actually his argument here is descriptive in this sense of looking at what is and what's the logic of what is happening here, and what the dangers of what's happening in here. And only here do we get the alternative, which is if we're going to do something, let's fix take the second principal part and save it. And this way, achieve the goal that the idea of the German constitutional work is saved. Otherwise, we will meet with a quick end with the fictions of value neutrality, value majority functionalism that is pitted against value and truth. And then truth will have its revenge. That's a great line. Truth will have its revenge. Okay, we'll stop here. It's been longer than I thought it would be. If you liked it, like it. Didn't like it, okay, liked it, like it. Share with a friend. Share it on your social media. If you didn't like it, say no, I didn't like it. But put why you didn't like it in the comments. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. I will respond to things. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe and get others to subscribe. Encourage others. Let's grow this up a little bit. If you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. Another thing you can do is my also my links to my academic background is below too. Um, Another way you want to help me do what I do here, you want to contribute, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar, or you can send me money by PayPal. I didn't put that links down there, PayPal, something like that. I don't have it. I haven't set that up yet. Maybe I should. Who knows? But next, what you can do is buy a book, buy one of my books, listed below. The books are listed below. You can get them through Amazon or anything else you want. Buying it by Lulu, my Lulu book by Lulu would be best, but that's on there. Again, this is Tuesday coming next week. It's Tuesday. We'll see what it is. I think this is on Tuesday, so therefore the next one will be out. The last part will be on Thursday. On this, we'll take care and have a good day. See you later. Bye bye.